Welcome, everybody. It's so nice to see about 15 of you. I'm Nadine Durbach, licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist. And today's topic for coping with COVID is Ask Me About Relationships and Marriage. I really am going to try to stick to the 30 minutes. We've started a few minutes later. So I expect to end around 1:05, 1:10, and I'm going to ask our staff, our admin, or whoever's hosting to just send me a message in chat when there's probably 2 to 3 minutes left so that I can wrap up. I'd appreciate that. Coping with COVID. Well, for those of you that were on our call last week, you know that myself and 4 other mental health professionals got together to really look at the difficulties and the challenges that all of us are experiencing during this time. And depending on our area of expertise, we broke up into the different ages and stages. And so today's an opportunity for me to talk with you a little bit about relationships and marriage under quarantine. None of us have been in this predicament before. This is all new for all of us, including us mental health professionals. And so today really is an opportunity for me to talk to you about what I'm seeing as I'm doing teletherapy with the couples that I work with, and also the information that I've gleaned from looking at what other professionals are putting out there. And the news has some interesting information on marriage and relationships under quarantine. So today's really a synthesis of that information. Today is not intended to replace psychotherapy, couples counseling, or individual counseling. And the information is quite generic. It's just tips for getting through this time, tips for building stronger relationships during quarantine and always. But definitely, if you are experiencing stress in your relationships to the point where your anxiety is heightened, you're feeling sad, depressed, you're feeling isolated, you're feeling very angry, you may want to reach out to myself or any of the mental health professionals who are on the resources page for the Coping with COVID session that we put on last Thursday. Okay, let's get started. Next slide. So the first part of the presentation today is really going to be what I call tips from the trenches. You know, being a psychotherapist and doing teletherapy, I really feel like I'm in people's homes, in their living rooms, in their relationships, to the extent that they let me in. And the tips that I'm offering today is information based on the work that I've been doing with couples since shelter in place and lockdown started. I have a private practice in Newport Beach. I work with individuals, couples, and families, and I encourage you to visit my website and feel free to email me if I don't address anything that you may be struggling with, or if this presentation elicits more questions for you. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first thing that I think is important to note, and I spoke about it last week, is that quarantine is putting a giant magnifying glass over our lives. And, you know, if our relationships are historically good, it's probably good now. You know, we're annoying each other, we're irritating each other, but foundationally the relationship is strong and intact. But if historically the relationship is unhealthy or dysfunctional, your relationship may appear cracked right now, and it might feel very scary to you to imagine, you know, looking further into that magnifying glass and seeing where those cracks lie. Quarantine is an opportunity to look at the cracks in our relationships so that we can be more constructive and productive and make changes. But this really requires tremendous honesty and vulnerability and patience. And to be quite honest with you, the stresses of COVID, the financial stressors, the emotional, the social, the physical, you know, every time we go into a supermarket and everybody's masked up and gloved up, that even that in and of itself can sort of heighten anxiety. Those stressors are impacting our desire and our ability to work on our relationships. So remember that this is a magnifying glass experience, and that if the relationship is historically good, it's probably stable and healthy now, even with a few blips. But really, if it's unhealthy or dysfunctional from the past, those cracks are appearing pretty large right now. Next screen, please. So, you know, the foundation of any healthy relationship are what I call building blocks. And these are the foundational elements of any intimate relationship. And, you know, if you're building a house, you can't just have a roof over your head. You have to have floors and walls and windows and doors to have a home. And so building blocks for relationships are like the floors and the walls and the doors and the windows and the roof of relationship. And for me, as a therapist, I'm always looking for three foundational blocks, and I call those trust, honesty, and reliability. I'd like you now to all go to the chat, and if you can, just to type in what your own building blocks are in your relationships. And then I will start to read those off, and we'll see as a collective what are some of the building blocks in the relationships that we have going on right now. So I invite you to use the chat and to add some other building blocks that you think are absolutely foundational to your relationships. Okay, so we have everything from integrity, compassion, kindness, sense of humor, authenticity, respect, mutual respect, very good, affection, communication, good. And we'll look at some of that today. But as you can see, you know, people have their own ideas of what those building blocks look like. And I would encourage you during quarantine, if you can, to have those discussions with your partner, your spouse, and to sort of reassess and reevaluate, go back to the foundation, to the very beginning, and take a look at some of those building blocks. Okay, so moving along, please, to the next slide. All right, so when I'm working with couples, I'm looking for what I call glue. And what is glue? If we have kids, we know what glue is. Glue is the stuff that makes things stick to each other. And relational glue is the stuff that makes two people stick together. You know, once upon a time, you were wildly attracted to your partner. And, you know, for those of us who have been married for decades, we need more than a shared history, shared children, and shared finances, whether there's a lack of or an abundance of, to keep us stuck together. And, you know, I always say that grateful people tend to be happy people. So I'm going to share a sort of an assignment that I give to a lot of my couples. And that is that I ask them to keep a weekly journal or log and write down one quality a day that they find attractive, respectable, honorable, likable, hot, and sexy in their partner. Find the qualities that attract you to your partner. You could ask your partner to do a similar exercise, and after 1 week, you'll have at least 7 to 10 of these qualities, and you can review your list together. And this really goes towards heightening relational intimacy. And when I say intimacy, I'm not actually talking about sexual or physical intimacy in that way. Relational intimacy is really that sense where it's you and me, babe, against the rest of the world. That is a sense of trust and support and almost like a wall, a barrier between the two of you and what you face on a day-to-day basis. And relational intimacy can grow during COVID by doing something like this. Okay, moving along. Okay, communication. You know, there's not a relationship in the universe that doesn't suffer from, you know, some type of communication snafu at some point. None of us are really instructed or taught how to be effective communicators all the time, if at all. And so I think communication is just one of those areas that is tricky for couples, but there are some basic tenets to communication that I'd like to review with you today. caring and communicating. How do you want to approach your communication? So I always instruct my couples and I say, please think about caring and communicating versus criticizing and crunching. When you come to communication with gentleness and compassion and a warmth and a true desire to support your partner, to have needs met, you're coming at it from a caring position. But if you come at it with resentment and anger and a buildup, your communication can come across very critical, and you end up actually crunching the essence of what it is you're trying to say and express to your partner. And actually, you can end up crunching your own and your partner's sense of dignity and sense of self-worth. And we absolutely want to try and avoid that. If your partner irritates you and annoys you, I want you to imagine that 100% you are doing the same to your partner, especially during COVID. We're on top of each other and we're bound in the same homes. And in terms of connecting before you correct, I'd just like you to imagine that you approach your partner with a sense that as irritating and annoying as they may be to you, you are to them. And since we can only change or grow or improve ourselves, I'm going to encourage you to solicit constructive feedback from your partner. Successful companies do this all the time. They send out surveys and then they get the results, they analyze them, and they look for ways to create and implement changes in their company, in their systems, in their product, in their servicing. And we can do that in our relationships as well. But when we go towards our partner to solicit that kind of feedback, we want our communication and the feedback to be purposeful, to be constructive, to be gentle, and most certainly have a nurturing element to it. And I always say that, we go where we feel welcomed, but we stay where we feel valued. And I want you to think about that as we enter a weekend where perhaps we're spending even more time with our partners, and to find ways to really show your partner how you value him or her. Okay, so that's a little bit on communication. When giving your partner feedback, going back to communication, when giving your partner feedback, please always make sure that you're doing it with love and tenderness. You're not angry and resentful when you're going to give that feedback. It's so important to do it in private to maintain the dignity of each other, but specifically of your partner. Please give feedback in private, not in front of the kids, not in front of the in-laws, and hopefully not in the written form, because so much gets lost in translation. Really that face-to-face. And for those of you that may be separated to partners right now, just even this, getting on a Zoom call together, FaceTiming each other, there's so much that can be gleaned from just looking at each other versus reading each other's words. Okay, moving along. Next slide. So, it's not been possible to talk about quarantine and sheltering in place and COVID and coronavirus without hearing self-care. And we spent a lot of time in our call last week reviewing self-care. So I'm not going to really talk about the ways to care for yourself, but more to say that it's very good for couples to lead separate and interesting lives. So sheltering in place has not been a normal and typical experience, and it's actually not even healthy, because we are meant to be apart in order to come back together. So we go apart, we come back together, and this creates some kind of a dynamic where, the desire is increasing, the desire to know each other, to be together, to understand each other, to enjoy each other is increasing. But for many of us, we're not having that time apart. And so I've been saying to the couples that I'm working with, you can't miss your partner if you don't miss your partner. So take time away, even if it means that you're walking the dogs at separate times of the day, even if it means, you don't have to go to the supermarket together. You don't have to run errands together. It's important to have time alone. And I say that the power of solitude actually supports the power of connection. So again, having that separate time so that there's a buildup for connection. When we talk about self-care, you know, it's just like when we go on the airplanes and the flight attendants tell us to put on our own oxygen masks before we reach over to help a person who may be vulnerable or younger next to us. And this looks different for each person. The other day in session, I had a client tell me, I exercise and he sleeps. I thought that was cute, but it actually pointed to the fact that everybody knows what's right for them and how to care for themselves. Now, sleeping too much is not good. It could be one of the signs of an impending depression. But again, you know, everything in moderation. And so self-care could look like a bubble bath for one person. It could look like sitting in the backyard and reading a book or a magazine. It could look like baking or cooking. Some people find that that's very cathartic and therapeutic. It could be something creative like paint by numbers or poetry. Last week we did Zen tangles on our call. So I'm just going to encourage you to find ways to really care for yourself before you care for your partner. Okay, next slide. All right, so this slide I called Who's in the Sandbox? And if you have kids, you'll remember the moments in parks where the kids get into the sandbox, or if you remember being a child and playing in the sandbox. It was really never a great experience to play in the sandbox with a buddy, was it? But it was always a lot of fun and very, very joyful if you found a playmate in the sandbox who was light and kind and nice, and just an enjoyable moment of you know, playing together. So I want you to think about who's in your sandbox and who are you when you enter the sandbox in your relationship. Are you playful or are you uptight? Are you using humor to laugh with each other, not at each other? Nobody really likes to be teased, especially partners. I wrote sharing is caring because there's never been a better time to really express how you care by sharing. And I would like to encourage you to think about bringing a lightness and a levity and some fun versus a heaviness to the relationship. And you can do so in so many ways and get really creative. So I'd like you to turn to the chat box once again, and I'd like you to share with me, and then I'll be able to share with everybody else. How are you and your partner doing in the sandbox? What are you doing? How are you playing together during quarantine? So if you'll open up your chat boxes and be kind enough to just let me know how you are doing in your relationships to maintain that playfulness and that sense of levity and lightness. Okay, so somebody said that she's leaving love notes on her partner's desk or in the refrigerator. Ooh, I like that one. I'm going to try that this weekend. Somebody else said that they're cooking, they're watching TV, they're hiking. Somebody else said that she's making her partner's favorite foods. Somebody said that they're rallying around the ridiculousness of their child. Somebody else said a sense of humor when admitting something isn't done. Good. So you're all finding ways, hopefully, to bring some lightness and playfulness into the relationship, because going through this together is very daunting and very heavy. Somebody else just said we blame it on the dog. I love that. And then you go and you cuddle them together. Okay. All right. Next slide, please. Okay. So, you know, the million-dollar question, intimacy. When I talk about relational intimacy, I'm not necessarily talking about sexual or physical intimacy. But in this slide, this is the time to talk about that physical part of our relationships. You know, we understand that stress does a number with desire, right? So the higher the stress, the lower the desire usually, though having physical and sexual touch can be a stress reducer and can feel wonderful as well. But, you know, we've been hearing that they're going to be all kind of quarantine babies in 8, 9, 10 months from now. But I'm not so sure about that, because the truth of the matter is that, especially for women, when we are under stress, when our bodies are really feeling the weight of stress, the chance of getting pregnant is reduced significantly. Having said that, physical touch during quarantine can take the form of so much. You can really think out of the box in terms of moving away from the bedroom and from that sexual experience to much more of a physical enhanced experience. For those of us, myself included, I'm missing my monthly massages. I haven't gone for a pedicure or a manicure in a few months. I haven't had a good haircut. And so you can actually ask your partner to do that with you, to give you a massage, to take a hand at painting nails, toenails or fingernails, to rub cream on your hands. It can be a very intimate experience to, take a stab at, not literally, metaphorically, take a stab at cutting your partner's hair. And so think creatively, think out of the box when it comes to physical touch. And of course, if there's still fireworks in the bedroom, that's just fabulous. But I guess my cautionary word about this is to lower expectations during this time and to really talk about what the new boundaries and the new expectations are around sexual intimacy, because everybody's stress levels are different, and like I said, stress impacts desire. I encourage you to think about keeping up your date nights. For people who have been married for decades, maybe you don't date night anymore. Well, it's never been a better time to start that. And you don't even have to leave the house. You can set a candle, light a candle, set the table, make something delicious that your partner will enjoy, and see where that leads. There's all kinds of things that you can do. Pour your favorite beverage, maybe go on your patio or your backyard, look at the stars together. Anyhow, okay. And then I put a note about phototherapy, and it's just amazing the power of looking at photos together to really reminisce together, especially for people who have been in a relationship for many, many years. Pull out some old photos, old videos, and really have a good laugh at, how you used to look and how you used to be. So the next slide I called We Are Laird, and this is really an opportunity to get to know one another. And I put Jada Pinkett Smith because just yesterday I saw a YouTube video where she has admitted that, coronavirus for her and her husband, actor Will Smith, has really led them to see that after 25 years of marriage, she doesn't really know her husband so well, and that's a concern. And so she's going to use this time to really date her husband and get to know her husband. And, I say fake it till you make it if you have to. Our actions and our behaviors can actually elicit emotions and feelings. So if you want to feel more in love, act more in love. And we know that the more we put into something, the more we get out of it. And I always say, the more we give, the more we love. That's certainly true with our children, and it can certainly be just as true with our partners. And love comes from giving. And you take a moment to think about, what is it that my partner needs? What the exercise of getting to know your partner in a new way during COVID. Okay, next slide. Okay, so a few questions came in prior to today. I've chosen a couple to answer that I thought were COVID specific. A couple of the questions were not so COVID specific, and if we have time, I can review those, but I'll start with these questions that came in. The first question was, is this the very fact that I'm to bring up issues that have been historically dormant you know, there's just so much stress all around all of us, and you know your partner best, you know yourself best. You're really going to have to ascertain if this is a time that you really want to handle any more stress. You know, you can certainly contact me, contact another psychotherapist, to engage in couples counseling or in individual counseling. But I would say, because of the umbrella of stress that is over all of us, if something's been dormant, I personally don't think it's the best time to bring it up with a spouse or partner. But you know yourselves best. And like I said at the beginning of our presentation, that talking about difficult, heavy issues, as long as it's productive and constructive and gentle and without that crunching element to it, it could have a positive outcome. But I'll trust that whoever sent in that question will find a way to address that, whether it's now or once we're out of shelter in place. The next question that came in asked about handling a couple's differences in COVID strictness. I cannot really compromise without feeling worry and stress. And I wrote some notes about that. And I put here, you'll see I put coping styles, expectations, and the Moscow prioritization scale. Last week we looked at coping styles, and I don't want to spend time now reviewing them. They're on a slide. But I think one of the things to remember is that all of us respond to stress and challenge and crisis from our own unique blueprint. And you can take a look at the coping styles. You can analyze how you cope during stress, how your partner copes during stress, and you'll see that maybe some of your differences are a result of the fact that you just cope very differently. Expectations is another area. You know, you have to have some flexibility. Every relationship, whether it's in COVID or not in COVID, there has to be compromise. You have to have the ability to bend and to collaborate. Really, the goal right now is to find a common ground. I'd encourage you to work on your own stressors. The person who wrote this said they feel worried and stressed. They can't really compromise without feeling that worry and stress. And again, going back to our session from last week, we have 12 ways to regulate stress and anxiety, and I encourage you to take a look at that and to look at your own stress and how you're managing your stress. And maybe once you start to manage your own stress, you'll notice that your ability to approach your partner and come from a compromising, more bending, more flexible position will be more likely. In terms of Moscow, you might be wondering what that means. And the Moscow scale is used in many corporations. I happen to know that Facebook uses it and a couple of other high-tech giants. And the M stands for must have. You know, what are the non-negotiables for you? The S is should have. The should haves are elements in your relationship that make you feel safe, make you feel secure. But if you had to go without them, you would still survive in the relationship. The C stands for could have. It's ideal, but survival is possible without it. And the W stands for will not have or won't need. And I encourage you to maybe look at the scale and write out what your must-haves, your should-haves, your could-haves, and your will-not-haves are. See if you can approach the strictness around COVID from that angle. And I hope that that's helpful. Let's see how we're doing on time. It's 1:06. I'm happy to keep going another few minutes to answer the other questions that came in. If you feel that you have to leave the call at this time, could we go to the last slide? And I really hope that you leave today with a takeaway, and that is that the things that challenge us the most are the things that we have to give the most to. And if your relationships, your intimate relationship with your partner or your spouse is really feeling very challenging right now, I would encourage you to give to that, to find ways to give to it. But obviously, if there's a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, you're having a very difficult time, I'm going to encourage you to reach out to me or to any other therapist, and maybe start to do the heavy lifting of relationship and couples counseling. If you need to leave the call at this time, thank you so much. I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes to answer the 2 other questions, and you can just leave the call. I'll keep going. Another question came in about trust, how to break the trust, how to mend trust once it's been broken. And I just want to review, you know, that trust is absolutely, if not the essential element of a relationship, one of the top 3, in my opinion. It's just so foundational. And it requires a lot. It requires open, gentle communication. I often speak to my couples about imagining a bank and imagining a trust bank. And you know, you deposit, but one serious infringement can be like the entire withdrawal. And so to keep thinking of ways to make deposits into the trust bank. But really, building trust requires time and patience. You need to be able to keep your promises, you know, maintain the little things like paying bills, calling when late, checking in before going grocery shopping. Hi, honey, is there anything you'd like for the fridge or the pantry? So just keeping those little things going. You know, I encourage couples to keep each other's secrets. Do not keep secrets from each other, but keep secrets for each other. That's essential to maintaining and to enhancing trust. It really gives a sense that it's you and me, babe, against the rest of the world. You know, you want to communicate by looking at each other. When trust has been broken, get away from texting and emailing and the written word. A lot gets lost in translation in written messages. And even if you're not living with your partner, like I said, just find ways to get on the screen, because there's so much in what we call affect, which is, you know, nonverbal body language and facial gestures. And, you know, if somebody's exhausted, they'll be slumping. You'll catch all of that. But if it's written, you won't. Try, you know, in terms of building trust, try not to judge. If something's important to your partner, that's it. It's important to your partner, and it can go without your judgment. And trust increases and enhances when people feel safe in their intimate relationships to just be who they are and to, you know, speak their truth and be their authentic selves. That goes a long way. Be forgiving. Trusting does not mean that mistakes won't happen. Mistakes happen, but holding on to past transgressions only serves to erode our relationship. So please find ways to, you know, open your heart to forgiveness. And obviously, you know, depending on the transgression, you know, many people think that cheating in a relationship is, you know, just a no turning back kind of thing, a deal breaker. So I'm not saying that you have to forgive every transgression that's ever been done upon you, but you have to decide, you know, what can I live with? What can I live without? What absolutely is a non-negotiable? And you'll take it from there. Work on your own personal growth when it comes to trust. You know, growing yourself means that you can come to the relationship as a more enhanced, more developed, more insightful human being, and you will probably have more to give to the relationship, and you'll see that the relationship and the trust within the relationship can grow because you've been growing yourself. And finally, to be supportive. You know, I often tell couples, in relationships, we're 2 human beings doing the best we can with what we've got. And, you know, life is tough, especially now during this shelter in place. If I didn't answer any questions that came in, please feel free to reach out to me directly through my website or an email. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be with me today and to understand a little bit more about enhancing relationships and marriage during COVID. I hope you found this practical and meaningful and useful. And I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, peace and joy in your hearts and your homes. Thanks. Bye-bye.